What's good, y'all? It's your boy HB with Final Round and Drive Time Boxing. I want to talk about Jake Paul and Ben Askren, the big fight tonight. I'm really excited for it, man. This is what boxing is about. I know there's a lot of people who are hating and looking at this and think, oh, it's a mockery of the sport. Jake Paul's not a real fighter, I understand that sentiment to a certain degree, but being a competitor in the sport myself and also being a fan, I think it's great, man. We're getting more fans to the sport, a different genre of fans coming in. There's a whole undercard of legitimate fighters who are going to get exposure and attention from this. I mean, look, Jake Paul really was what? He was the undercard of Roy Jones and Mike Tyson. And he was the fucking standout of the card. He got more notoriety from that fight. And he wasn't even the main event. So imagine if we have some good fights on the undercard with legitimate boxers or MMA fighters performing, and they get more attention for it. So, I mean, I think it only does the sport good. It's getting more attention. If it makes sense, if it makes dollars, it makes sense, as the old saying goes. So I'm not hating on this. On top of that, Jake Paul is taking this shit seriously. I see a kid who is passionate. I see somebody who wants to be a good boxer, who wants to compete, and who is a student of the game. And of course, he comes off very cocky, very arrogant, very childish at times. And, you know, sometimes it seems like he's stepping out of line. But, man, he's making money. He's a promoter. He's a YouTube influencer. I mean, that's how he made his name, is getting attention. And he's doing it now. And it's really fucking beneficial to promote yourself in a sport like boxing, especially where you want to make money. It's shocking to me that more fighters, well, I understand why more fighters don't do this, because it's just a time issue, but more fighters should put emphasis on their persona, their promotion, you know, and how to market themselves, how to make a fight exciting. Because, you know, we tend to think like all fighters, competitive fighters in the UFC or boxing, we tend to think, oh, like all these guys are making big money. And that's not the case. Not everybody's making Floyd Mayweather money, Canelo Alvarez money, or Conor McGregor money in the fight game. You know, Steve-O asked Ben Askren a very, very interesting question, a very great question for an interview. Steve-O from Jackass, he asked Ben Askren if, like all the fights he's had, is this fight with Jake Paul the most money he's going to take home from all the fights he's had in the past? And Ben Askren said, yeah. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ben Askren was also saying that like all the fights he's had before this one, add them all together, they still don't accumulate up to the payday he's making with Jake Paul. So that's crazy, man. It's crazy that Olympic wrestler, somebody who's been a combat athlete and professional and high-level competitor, you know, is not getting compensated for all the work he's put in. So I'm very happy for Ben Askren, even if he gets embarrassed, even if he's doing this purely for money. I don't think he is, but you can tell he's promoting himself very damn well in his cryptocurrency, and good for him, man. Like, he deserves a good payday and to take care of his family after putting in all the work and effort. That being said, you know, I think it's great for the sport, man. It's bringing a different genre of fans. I think it's going to bring attention to other fighters on the undercard. And who knows, we may get a great fight on the undercard. And those may be legitimate professional fighters. And this could change their career. Just like, I mean, Jake Paul was the undercard on the undercard of Mike Tyson, Roy Jones. And he blew up from that. All right, that fight was more entertaining with Jake Paul than the Mike Tyson Roy Jones fight, and those two are professional fighters, obviously past their prime, but nonetheless. So I don't think this is bad for boxing, and as long as the person who's crossing over from whatever realm they're coming from, whether it be YouTube or another sport, as long as they're taking it seriously. Like I think Nate Robinson, for example, it's a joke when a guy like that jumps into the sport, because he's not taking it seriously. He has a false sense of what he's capable of and what the sport is. He doesn't give the sport respect to what it is and how much skill, technique, and time it takes to become efficient and effective. And so when I look at guys like that, or like a CM Punk going into the UFC, that is a mockery to me, because I don't think those guys really took it very seriously or really did their homework in understanding what the fuck they were getting into. So that's why I look at Jake Paul. You can hate him. He comes off as very cocky, very arrogant, annoying, childish at times. And sometimes I feel like he is stepping outside of his boundaries. But, you know, I feel like he's respecting the sport. He's putting in the time, the effort. You see him in sparring. You know, you see him significantly improving over time. And I mean, that's all I can ask for from a competitive fighter, is that they're invested, and they're not just invested physically, but also mentally in respecting and appreciating the sport. So I'm not hating on it. And, you know, I think out of all the YouTubers, he's the one taking it the most seriously. So good for him. And this is a very intriguing matchup. This is what fighting is about, man. Figuring out, you know, what styles match up best against each other. And this is fun. This is absolutely going to be fun to watch. I mean, I could be wrong. It could be a complete shit show and terrible performance on both parts of them. But, I mean, that's the beauty of fighting, man. Like, you can strip it down to its bare bones and it's still fucking entertaining. But that being said, I want to make a prediction. I kind of want to hit on a few topics here. For instance, look, this is a very interesting matchup, because when you look at, okay, here you have Jake Paul, you know, a young gun. He's hungry. He's coming from a very unique place in terms of not growing up within the sport. He's been boxing for about 3 years. He's very wealthy because of his profession, being a YouTube influencer. So he has all the resources, and he's taking advantage of it. He's sparring good opponents. He's taking matches. He's showing significant improvement over the last 3 years, and he's even developed the ability to knock out his opponents, and developed the conditioning and the technique and the ability to maximize his power. So it's a very intriguing, and he's going to go up against the guy in Ben Askren, who's a decorated combat athlete, who's been an Olympic grappler, wrestler, who went 19-2 in his MMA career, who's been in dogfights with some top strikers in the UFC. But he's not a very efficient and effective striker, especially with his hands. And he's never boxed, like solely boxed in his life. And so it's going to be very entertaining to see what prevails. Is it the young guy in boxing who's showing significant improvement with little experience, or is it going to be the decorated combat athlete but who has a lack of striking ability? And to me, this is entertaining. And then you have two characters. Ben Askren is a polarizing character in himself. The fact that, you know, in the MMA world, he was kind of hated or loved. And what's kind of cool now, he's really, a lot of people like him. You know, he's been able to show off his personality and who he is. And not to mention, going up against a guy like Jake Paul, he kind of, you know, he looks like the good guy compared to him. But, you know, this is great, man, and I can't wait to watch it. But when I'm being objective and when I'm being honest, so who's gonna win, right? And I'm looking at this, and I don't want to make this fight to be something that it's not, or something that it shouldn't be. But this is boxing versus MMA, whether we like it or not. You know, in the boxing world, we don't consider Jake Paul our best representation of the sport. And I know in MMA, there's a lot of guys that don't consider Ben Askren a great representation of MMA striking. Like, if I was going to choose anybody to represent MMA in a boxing match, it would probably be like Anderson Silva, which he has a match coming up with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., which is very, very interesting as well. I'm sure we'll start talking about that next. But, you know, these guys aren't the best representations of the sport, but nonetheless, they are going to represent it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of uneducated, ignorant people out here who are going to think that it's boxing versus MMA, and it's not. But that being the case, you know, I got to side with the sport I love and to what I think is the truth. Now, when I look at Ben Askren and Jake Paul, I try to judge this based off of technique and skill. And yes, the main factor here is, okay, and Ben Askren mentioned this. It's like, okay, I'm not the most skilled boxer. I'm not even claiming to be good at boxing at all. But I am experienced. I have been in wars. I have been in the trenches. And there's a skill to understanding how to compete at a high level, which I don't think Jake Paul has. And that's what Ben Askren's point was. But, you know, for me, as tough as Ben Askren is, as good as a chin he may have, and even that's in question because the last knockout he had from Masvidal was very devastating. And all it takes is one terrible knockout to make you chinny after that, right? You can only take so many hard hits to the chin. And I'm not sure if we'll see that come into play tonight or not, but it's something to think about. But regardless of that, we know Ben Askren's a tough motherfucker. He's a grinder. He's a hard worker. And we know he's going to come to fight. But what I've learned through my experience in boxing is that if you're not bringing some sort of skill set to the table, technique within the sport, some sort of style, some sort of strategy, and it's all right if you're not the most fundamentally sound or technically sound, as long as you have something to bring to the table in terms of skill set, you can compete, and you can compete at a high level. Now, obviously, when you watch Jake Paul hitting the mitts and shit like that, you know, that's not going to tell me whether he's a legitimate fighter or not. It's the fact that when I look at Jake Paul and it's his whole entire situation, I see somebody who's developing fairly well as an efficient and effective fighter for his level. So when you just look at the both of them objectively and look at what they have to offer in terms of their technique and training, I see Jake Paul, who has some skills. Like I said, I'm not saying skills on the level of Canelo Alvarez or even, you know, a ranked boxer who's like number 30, right? I'm not even saying he's on that level, even close to it. But I do see somebody who has developed some skills when I see him train. And when I look at Ben Askren, I don't see that. And it's embarrassing to a certain extent. And because you've been a combat athlete your whole life, I know boxing wasn't your game, but you should have picked up some basic fundamentals and principles. And I will say this, watching the evolution of Ben Askren through his training camp, he has improved significantly. And, you know, if he had more time for this fight, I would definitely be choosing him. So you have my answer there. I would definitely choose him to win this. But, and I would love to see him keep on boxing and to see how far he can improve his striking skills, because look how fast he improved him now. Now imagine if he spends more time, put some head movement in there, right? Because his technique improved, his movement improved a little, but I still don't see any head movement when he's hitting the mitts or doing some sort of drills. And that's the big issue for me. It's like, I want to choose Ben Askren. I always choose the more experienced fighters, right? But this is a special exception because, first of all, boxing is not a sport, and I don't see any sort of skill set that he's bringing to the table. And one of the first things you learn in this sport is, like, it's one of the most sobering and shocking things you learn when you start to box is how much skill is required. Like, anybody can fight. Don't get me wrong. Anybody can throw punches aggressively and be tough. But to fight efficiently, to fight effectively, and to be consistent and win, that you need skills, right? Like, I wouldn't expect you to hit a baseball off rip, right? Or go and hit a golf ball consistently down range without any sort of skills, right? Without any sort of practice, without any sort of understanding of technique and knowledge of the sport. Like, you just wouldn't be able to do it. Now, there's some naturally gifted people out there, right? But those are exceptions. You know, it's the same thing in boxing. The only difference is you can get away with being a little bit less skilled, but that doesn't mean you're going to have success. My point is that you need to have something to compete in this sport and talk in terms of your technique and skill. Because if you don't, you're going to be in there helpless. And I don't care how good your fucking chin is. I don't care how tough you are. A human can only take so many hits to the fucking head and body. And even if you are tough, you know, if you're getting beat up so badly and you can't control it, this fight's going to get stopped anyways by the referee. And, you know, we also know that Jake Paul has power. He does. And I don't care who he knocked out, the level of the competition. If you have power, you have power. Like, that resonates on a low level or at a high level. Like, that doesn't change. You know what I'm saying? Now, obviously, if you go up against the more technical opponent, you have to have more ways of being able to deliver that power. But we know Jake Paul has power, you know, because you can throw a lot of guys around his level into that ring. It doesn't mean that all those other fighters would have the ability to knock out Nate Robinson. And so, yeah, that's why I just can't pick Ben. Is when I watch him train, when I watch him strike, I don't see any sort of skills. And he has improved immensely, but the only thing he's really improved is his technique. And, you know, improving your technique is not enough, right? Like, there's a lot that goes into being a skilled fighter. And even if he did improve his technique, it was only on the mitts. Like, I want to see him in sparring. I want to see him, or some past examples of some sort of validation through at least sparring. And I just didn't see anything from Ben Askren that makes me say, like, this is how he can win this fight. Like, I'm confident in choosing Ben Askren to win. There's nothing I can find. And it's disappointing for me because I hate to choose against somebody who's as decorated as him in the fight game. And when I watch Jake Paul, I see somebody who has skills. And I see him not only doing that on the mitts, right, or the heavy bag. Anybody can look good on the mitts and heavy bag, but I also see him bringing it into sparring. And, you know, if the rumors are true, I'm hearing he's knocking out or stunning guys who are legitimate amateur fighters or low level professionals. And that's why I'm buying into what Jake Paul is doing, because he's not just doing us on the bag. He's not just hitting the mitts. He's proving it in sparring and in matches. And you can say all you want about the Nate Robinson fight. Oh, well, the Nate Robinson fight, Nate Robinson was garbage. He had no skill, and anybody could have knocked him out. First of all, no, not anybody can knock him out, right? And two, I like to see young fighters go up against guys like that. It's like one of those boxes you have to check off, right? I love that, because when you have a type of berserker fighter like that, somebody who's not in control of their emotions or their fear, and they rush in and they just swing wild punches and they're overly aggressive, they don't have any understanding of distance, timing, or how to utilize a jab to get in defense. There's still a useful application for guys like that when you're going up against guys like that. Because what I like to see is a young fighter who's developing. Can they handle that type of pressure? Can they stay calm and composed when a guy's rushing them like that? And can they find a countering opportunity or shot? And can they exploit their opponent and use their momentum against them and get a knockout? And that was actually a nice little primer for Jake Paul, because it showed he has the ability to think in there, to stay calm, to stay composed, to see or set up a good knockout blow or shot, or learn how to stifle a guy who's not respecting you or is just fighting with complete fear and not controlling his emotions, which was the case with Nate Robinson. Don't get me wrong. Nate Robinson is garbage. He's delusional. He had no idea what he's getting into. He did not belong in that ring. But he was fucking, I mean, he went for it. You know, he fucking went for it. And, you know, that's a nice test for him, because I see a lot of amateur fighters who are very skilled, very technical. But when you put somebody, and they look very good against a sparring partner or an opponent who's also very controlled and skilled, right? It's very clean. But then when you put them up against a fucking berserker type, brawler type guy, or even a pressure fighter, those guys fold. These skilled technical guys fold because they can't stay calm and composed when they have an opponent who's overly aggressive and or just a brawler, right? So Jake Paul showed the ability to learn how to deal with that. So that's very impressive to me, regardless of the level of opponent. And so a lot of people are even sitting here and saying like, oh, Jake Paul's not going to know what to do with Ben Askren because Ben Askren's going to put relentless pressure on him and he's going to wear him down and he's going to fold and he's going to get tired. Look, I will say this. The one shot that I think Ben Askren has is taking Jake Paul into deep waters and drowning him. And almost having to pull somewhat a rope-a-dope, only being a little bit more putting pressure rather than being defensive like Ali against Foreman. Ben Askren's going to have to hope that Jake Paul gets tired. And I know mentally he's been trying to work Jake Paul and psych him out. And I think there is a chance of that. Jake Paul might walk into that ring and he might psych himself out and think about some of the shit Ben's been saying. And he might get in there and say, what am I doing? I'm in here with a real fucking fighter. Like, this is real shit now. And he might freeze up, or he might work himself so much mentally that he gets worked over physically. He gets physically tired. That is possible. But he may also lack the experience of understanding what it's like to be. Jake Paul might lack that experience in terms of going the distance in the ring, even though I think that can be worked on through sparring, which Jake Paul has been doing. And so that's Ben's hope. Like, let's try to drag this guy into deep water. Hopefully he gets tired and I can just start overwhelming him and make him quit or get the ref to stop the fight. But that's about it. That's all I can see, the only avenue of victory. And that's very sad for a professional combat athlete to have to rely on that strategy. Unless it's the only viable strategy. And I know what y'all are thinking about Mayweather and McGregor, but that's a completely different situation. And you know, Ben Askren is not facing Mayweather. He's facing fucking Jake Paul, okay? And he shouldn't have to rely on cardio and conditioning solely to get past this guy. There should be a certain level of skill that he has to where he can pick him apart and finish him that way. But he doesn't have the skill set. And here's another thing y'all have to think about. Ben Askren, yeah, he might have went the distance in the octagon, but MMA is not the same cardio as boxing. And Ben Askren, as far as I've checked, he does not have 8 rounds of a professional fight or amateur fight in boxing. He doesn't. Okay, he doesn't have 12 rounds, and it's a different type of cardio. And he's a grappler. He's not a striker. So I don't know. We can sit there and say, well, Ben Askren is going to rope-a-dope him, or Ben Askren's going to wear him down and take him to the later rounds. Maybe. But Ben Askren might have to worry about his fucking cardio and conditioning just as much, because he's not a fucking boxer and he's never went 8 rounds in his life. And he hasn't been putting that much sparring in to compensate for that. So he might be in a rude awakening as well. So that's why it's hard for me to pick Ben Askren, man. And Jake Paul, he's been training, man. He's been sparring. He may not have that actual experience in the ring, but I think you can compensate with lots of sparring against good partners and doing rounds. But I think there's many ways for Jake Paul to win this fight. You know, he can try to outpoint Ben Askren, which he'll probably have the advantage in. You know, he can try to knock him out as long as he doesn't get too greedy. You know, he can outbox him. I just think there's lots of different ways. Hell, he might be able to wear Ben Askren down in the later rounds. You know, I think there's lots of ways Jake Paul can win this fight because he has some technique and skill that will give him the opportunity and the vehicle to execute those things, to have those opportunities. And I just think Ben Askren is underestimating Jake Paul. I don't think he's taking him very seriously. And I think he's underestimating the sport of boxing, which I think a lot of mixed martial artists do. I don't think they understand the value of boxing and how deep it is, because it's just as deep. Like I hear so many mixed martial artists or fans of mixed martial arts, they talk about like jiu-jitsu, for instance, and talk about how deep it is and technical, and it's almost like a chess match. And it's the same thing in boxing. It's the same thing. And if you don't give it that type of respect, you might walk in there against a fucking low-level boxer like Jake Paul and get knocked the fuck out. You know, and you're going to wonder why. Well, how did this YouTuber do this? Well, because he's a student of the sweet science. He takes it seriously. And even though he acts like a fucking clown sometimes, it doesn't change the fact that he's a student of the fucking game. And if you're a student of this game, it can help you negate a lot of shit, like being inexperienced in terms of combat sports, right? Like, no, Jake Paul wouldn't last in the octagon with Ben Askren, but you know, he's developed skills and he's chosen an opponent who doesn't have many is not prominent at striking, and he is going to be able to take just 3 years of boxing and possibly win against a professional mixed martial artist with just 3 years of fucking boxing. Now, think about the power of boxing if that goes down tonight. You can literally, if you take it seriously, what you can do with just 3 fucking years against a professional mixed martial artist. So, I'm excited. I'm going Jake Paul. I just think he's really a student of the game. I believe he has skills and technique that's going to help him win this fight. And it's going to give him many options and ways to win this fight. And I think Ben Askren's going to walk in there and he's going to be shocked that there's just nothing he can do. And it doesn't matter how tough he is. It doesn't matter how fucking, how good his chin is. You can only take so many punches to the face, man. And, you know, there's levels to this game. I mean, and if you're not bringing, I always say skill over will, skills pay the bills, right? Toughness, like you use that for certain, you want to save that, man. You don't want to be a fighter who just relies on toughness, because that only takes you so far. You can only be tough so many times before you're getting hit repetitively to where you start getting tired of it. And, you know, I just believe Jake Paul has abilities that Ben Askren doesn't. I don't see any head movement by Ben Askren. His footwork has improved, but his footwork's not even that great. He doesn't have power. That's another terrifying thing. The guy doesn't have power. You know, he's not a boxer. He doesn't have experience boxing. It doesn't seem like he's taking it very seriously in terms of his opponent. And I just see somebody who's really underestimating the power of what boxing is and how effective it is in terms of forms of a mix of martial arts. So yeah, I'm going Jake Paul, and I would not be shocked if Ben Askren wins, right? Because at the end of the day, he is a professional combat athlete. I would not be shocked if he finds a way to fucking win this fight. And is there a chance of that? Yeah, there is a chance, because what Ben Askren said is true. he does have experience, and there is a skill to understanding how to deal with that type of pressure of competing against the best mixed martial artists in the world. But look, there's more fights coming up, man. I heard Anderson Silva, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. That's going to be fucking interesting, because I believe Anderson Silva is a great representation of the MMA world going into boxing. Actually, the funny thing is, even though Anderson would be representing MMA, most of Anderson Silva's skill sets in MMA are heavily influenced by boxing. And I find that funny. So, you know, I'll analyze that fight later. That's a really tough one to pick. But we'll get to that later. You know, we've seen this with Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor. You know, everyone thought, oh, Conor McGregor's tougher. You know, he has more power. And, you know, he's going to find a way to just knock Floyd Mayweather out. And it just, everybody who boxed understood, like, no chance. And everybody who didn't understand boxing, you know, actually thought McGregor had a chance. And some people actually think he had a great performance. And he didn't. He was literally carried throughout that fight by Mayweather. And McGregor just did not look as sharp as he did, because obviously he's not a boxer. He doesn't train with 18-ounce gloves on, and he's not used to wearing, you know, a boxing glove during a fight. He's not conditioned. It's two different sports. He's not conditioned for boxing. And, you know, McGregor went in there, as tough as he was, he got knocked upside his head. And if, you know, the ref didn't stop it early, he would have suffered a lot of fucking damage. In fact, I think that fight has played a significant role in why he's not the same fighter. You know, you take too many hits like that, man, it can change you. But even from people who think Mayweather has pillows for hands, you know, even if you get whopped upside your head with a pillow all day, you're going to get sick of it eventually. It's not going to be good for you. But I don't want to get off the railroad here, or the tracks here. Fact of the matter is, I do see Jake Paul as a boxer. Now, I'm not going to tell you what level boxer, because I have no idea, and that's why we're watching this fight. But I do see him as a boxer with some skill. And I look at Ben Askren, and I just don't see what he's going to do other than put pressure. But you figure out, if you don't have a jab, if you don't have defense, if you don't have good footwork, you can put all the pressure you want. You're just going to get whopped upside your head, you know. And that's a sweet science in itself, the art of putting pressure and being defensively responsible. You know, you want to watch guys who are efficient and effective at putting pressure, watch Mike Tyson, Julio Cesar Chavez, you know, Triple G, guys like that. But I think Ben Askren is going to be in a rude fucking awakening to figure out, like, this kid's got some skills, man, and I underestimated him and this sport. So this is your boy HB with Final Round, Drive Time Boxing. I want to hear y'all's opinions and your prediction. You know, I'm just starting this channel, so hopefully something comes of it. You know, I love the sport of boxing, MMA. I love it all, man. And I just love discussing this stuff, so hopefully something comes of this. And tonight, let's do it, man. Let's watch this fight, and I'll get back at you later.